I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and you're watching Middle East Now. Well, we're opening with news out of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad has just released a new propaganda video of Russian-Israeli hostage Alexander Sasha Trufanov. The now 29-year-old was taken captive from his home in Nir Oz on October 7th, the kibbutz just on the border of the Gaza Strip, along with his grandmother, his mother, and also his girlfriend, all three of whom were released last November in a temporary hostage exchange deal. Now, this is the third video that has been released of Sasha, who just turned 29 in captivity 2 days ago, marking his second birthday in Gaza, where he's been held for over 404 days now. Now, like many of the hostage propaganda videos that have been released, it is believed that his words were directed by his captors, which call on the Israeli public to take to the streets to call for a deal and heavily criticize the Israeli government. Here's part of that video, which his family has agreed to allow the media to air.
אני מבקש מכם, אזרחי ישראל, בבקשה, בבקשה, אל תברחו מאיתנו. אני מבקש מכם, אזרחי ישראל, בבקשה, בבקשה תצאו, תעשו ותפגינו. אני רוצה להודות לכם על ההפגנות שעשיתם כל שבוע, בשבת. אבל אני רוצה גם להגיד לכם, שנה שלמה שאתם מפגינים ועושים, ולממשלה לא באמת אכפת. עובדה, הנה אנחנו פה. אני חושב שאולי הגיע הזמן להגביר את ההפגנות. אני מבקש מכם, תצאו, תסגרו את הרחובות למשך תקופה. תעצו ותעשו שביתה למשך תקופה. תזכרו אותנו, אל תשכחו אותנו. אנחנו נמצאים פה בעזה בסכנה יומיומית, במצב קשה. בבקשה, בבקשה תפעלו ותעשו כל מה שאפשר כדי שתוכלו להחזיר אותנו בריאים ושלמים הביתה.
Well, joining us now is our correspondent Nicole Tzedek from Tel Aviv, Hostage Square. Nicole, where do hostage release and ceasefire negotiations stand at this point, following the news that Qatar is freezing its involvement?
Well, following that news, there still hasn't been really any momentum. And the whole decision behind Qatar's decision to freeze their involvement is because they hadn't seen any momentum from Hamas. Now, right now, we do have a group of American-Israeli family members of the American-Israeli hostages who are still captive in Gaza, 7 of them. Well, their family members are in Washington, D.C. right now, and they actually met with Blinken earlier this week. They're meeting with Biden today, and also the Secretary of State, Jake Sullivan, as well. And while meeting with these people, the U.S. officials continue to put the blame on Hamas for holding up said deal. In fact, what we heard from Sullivan just yesterday, it was a pretty strong statement that Hamas continues to hold up any chances of a deal, whereas the Netanyahu government, they said, is showing inklings that they do want to move towards at least this temporary ceasefire to get some of the hostages out and then see if they can push it forward. But right now, Natasha, it doesn't seem like there's any real movement on that. But the family members in Washington, D.C. right now are pushing for both administrations, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, to work together in this transition period before Trump takes office. They state that if they wait until January 20th, when the Trump administration is finally in office, that's not time to start the negotiations for a deal. They say that the time is running out. And if they wait until January, they don't know how many hostages will still be alive. And today's video published of Sasha Trufanov is another example of the condition that these hostages are being held in. And so those family members that are out there talking to the United States officials right now, they're truly trying to push some sort of a deal, but I can't really tell you exactly where it stands right now because it doesn't seem to be moving and progressing as much as these family members would hope.
All right, Nicole Tzedek joining us from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. We're going to be turning now to the family members of one of the Israeli hostages who's still being held in captivity. Joining us now is Ilan Dalal. He's the father of 23-year-old Israeli hostage Guy Gilboa Dalal, who was kidnapped by Hamas from the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. So, Ilan, you know, I'm assuming that you saw this video of Sasha, or at least heard what he had to say, read about it in the media. I mean, he called for bigger demonstrations, a ceasefire deal. He also said that he's become scared of the IDF because he fears continued military activity in Gaza is going to end up getting him killed. Obviously, we know that from past videos, from past hostage testimonies, much of what is said in these videos is often directed by captors, but I'm interested to hear what your response is to this video as a father of one of the hostages.
Well, when I saw the video, Of course, he's saying very bad things, but he was told what to do. This is obvious. And if we disregard to the context of what he said, and we look at his appearance after a year in captivity, it gives us a little bit confirmation, because we see that he looks fine. He looks good. He doesn't look like he's hungry or didn't get treatment or something like other hostages that we saw found in the tunnel were underweight and in very bad condition.
You have been going through this hell for over a year now, and the standstill negotiations is undoubtedly very disheartening for your family. I mean, at this point, what are you doing to try and get your son out of Gaza? What do you feel can still be done?
Well, we are doing everything we can, the same as we did yesterday. We are talking to the officials. We're making interviews. We're trying to keep the hostages high in the conscience of the public, and try to convince the government that the right way right now to release all hostages is to make an arrangement that will give a security to the people of the south to come back to their houses. We'll get the hostages back to their houses and end the war.
What do you know?
This is what we need to do right now.
At this point, what do you know about your son Guy's condition at this point, if anything at all?
Last time I heard anything was 5 months ago, right before the last rescue operation. We get a sign of life, and after the rescue operation, we understood that Hamas and all the others took all the hostages down to the tunnels. And since then, the intelligence is getting a hard time to get some information and signs of life, new signs of life.
You know, I'm interested to hear at this point what message you would want to send to the Israeli government about what you want to see happen right now, whether or not you want to see, you know, a push for the ceasefire deal, if you feel that the continued military activity is helping your son's situation or not.
As I said, what I think we should do right now is a comprehensive arrangement with international involvement that will bring this area into some kind of stability that will make a new regime in Gaza, that a civilian regime that will really care about the Gazan people and not care about just killing Israelis. Will make the people of the south come back to their houses safely and rebuild them, and the hostages, of course, will come back to their families and try to rebuild back their lives.
Ilan, obviously, you know, the U.S. is going to see a new administration right now, Trump coming into office in January. The hope is that by the time that happens, there will be some type of deal. Your son will be back here. But, you know, in the case that doesn't happen, what do you think in terms of how Trump is going to be able to negotiate?
Well, right now it's hard for me to see how the Trump administration will be different from the Biden administration. The only difference is that now in the head of the administration will stand a man that is not so predictable, and it can go for one hand that will help Israel, but in the other hand, if something will go like he wants, he can turn around and be against us. And I don't know what's going to be with Trump, but I can only hope that it will go to a better situation.
All right. Well, Ilan, you know, before we get off, is there anything that you would want to say to Guy right now? We know that obviously on I-24 News, there have been reports that hostages have seen our channel in Arabic in the Gaza Strip throughout the war.
I just want to tell him that we love him so much, to stay strong, to keep himself as much as he can, if he's not alone, to help as much as he can to others. and never lose hope. We're doing everything we can in order to get you out of there. And I'm sure that soon enough we'll be together, and we love you, and we send you very, very much power.
All right, Ilan, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, we're praying for your family, we're praying for Guy, and just hoping for the best, hoping that we're going to see him soon back here in Israel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wish.
All right, well, the 10 non-permanent members of the UN Security Council are once again targeting Israel, this time accusing the country of creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Now, this comes as Israel has reopened crossings into the enclave over the past 30 days and stepped up measures to ease conditions, with President Biden standing by his commitment to continue supporting Israel. Our correspondent Emily Francis has the details.
Outgoing President Joe Biden is doubling down before his term ends by not withholding weapons to Israel. This as the deadline passes to address the humanitarian aid crisis to Gazans.
We at this time have not made an assessment that that the Israelis are in violation of U.S. law. But most importantly, we are going to continue to watch how these steps that they've taken, how they are being implemented.
Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog met President Biden yesterday at the White House, thanking him for his support of Israel since the October 7th massacre.
Welcome back to the Oval Office in the White House. You've been a friend for a long time, a personal friend, and you know my commitment to Israel is ironclad, and we share a deep friendship. I want to thank you again for being here, and the floor is yours.
As we say in Hebrew, Toda Rabba. You've been an incredible friend of Israel and the Jewish people for decades, and we will never forget, ever in history, how you stood up with us in our darkest hour.
At the same time, a less friendly environment at the United Nations in New York. Envoys from various countries addressed the UN Security Council yesterday, condemning Israel for an alleged humanitarian disaster in Gaza and proposing a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire.
Most of Gaza is now a wasteland of rubble. What distinction was made and what precautions were taken if more than 70% of civilian housing is either damaged or destroyed? This has led to increasing hunger, starvation, and now, as we have heard, potentially famine.
Israeli lawmakers in the Knesset passed a law earlier this month limiting operations of the UNRWA Palestinian Aid Agency in Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. This as UNRWA volunteers are being investigated for their involvement in the October 7th massacre.
Israel has taken some important steps, including restoring aid deliveries to the north. Still, Israel must ensure its actions are fully implemented and its improvements sustained over time.
Israel insists it has delivered life-saving humanitarian aid, including allowing a polio vaccination campaign for over 500,000 Gazan children.
We need to see real and extended pauses in large areas of Gaza, pauses in any fighting, in any combat, so that the assistance can effectively get to people who need it.
As for food and supplies, Israeli authorities say Hamas operatives continue to raid and steal what's meant for civilians.
It is an exercise in slander, disguised as humanitarian concern. The IPC's latest report echoes one of the most unfounded, slanderous accusations against the state of Israel throughout this conflict.
Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, insists that the figures show the humanitarian situation in Gaza has improved substantially in recent months.
Israel has been proactive in supporting Gaza's food supply chain, with 3 million pita loaves produced daily. Additionally, 6 tankers of cooking gas have recently entered Gaza to sustain essential infrastructure.
Well, joining us now in the studio is international affairs analyst Dan Perry. So, the U.S. is essentially saying that it's not going to withhold weapons shipments to Israel because Israel has not breached American laws on blocking aid supplies. That's, of course, after this 30-day deadline that was given to the state of Israel to boost humanitarian aid access in Gaza or see military restrictions. Now, despite the U.S.'s claims, we're still seeing the UN say not enough has been done. Israel has not been doing enough to get enough aid inside. there was a lot of concern that Biden might somehow lash out at the state of Israel following Trump's win in the American elections and the fact that there's now only 2 months left in Biden's presidency. But what do you think this decision tells us about how Biden is going to handle the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and its proxies in his last 2 months in office?
I think it strongly suggests that Biden doesn't want to walk away and wishes to continue engaging with Israel in hopes of leaving some legacy behind in the Middle East and with Israel that is not the frustrating disaster from his perspective of the past year. And remember, many people in the Democratic Party are blaming the war for the loss in the elections. Now, the loss was profound enough that the war clearly wasn't the only reason, but it was one of many factors that hurt them, weirdly, with both Muslims in Michigan and Jews in Pennsylvania, both of which states they lost. So they're frustrated. They're still hopeful, I believe. I don't think Biden's going to lash out at anyone because he's so clearly pro-Israel and such a Zionist. I think he hopes, somehow still hopes for a breakthrough. And what we heard about Qatar may be part of that, maybe put pressure on Hamas and break this logjam and get something done, and maybe release some hostages, if not all the hostages, before January 20th. There is more than a small possibility that a dynamic has been put in place where nothing will move because everything is waiting for Trump. And I really, really hope that the government isn't cynical enough to act that way, the government of Israel, because that would mean people would die because of political machinations.
Well, Blinken came out today and said that Qatar did tell Hamas to leave Doha following reports that, following a strong urging from the United States, Qatar would do that. Of course, then Qatar denied these reports, said that's not true. We haven't told anybody to leave, and we haven't officially pulled out as mediators. We're just freezing our mediation right now. What does this tell us about who is ultimately, I mean, playing a major role in these mediations, if at all, with everything at a standstill?
Well, Qatar is very important, and they faced enormous pressure to crack down on Hamas, and one possible means of doing that is maybe to expel Khalid Mashal to a place where Israel can assassinate him and his two other, his band of merry men. I tend to believe Blinken. Qatar is in a difficult place publicly because they are committed to the Muslim Brotherhood narrative, and they have supported Hamas in a way, but they don't support the massacre of October 7th. This is part of a grander effort in a way, if that can be contemplated, even grander than the war in Gaza, to get Qatar and to get the rest of the Arab world, but Qatar is a difficult one because of their position as representing the Muslim Brotherhood, to get this whole ship to shift into a different direction where they're allied with the West, which brings us to Israel. Qatar, I suspect, would do more if there was a real plausible progression of things that might happen in the next couple of months to make it make sense. Putting pressure on Hamas to agree will go nowhere if Israel hasn't agreed to discuss a day after, again, because of Israeli politics. Think about the tripwires that have to happen here. Hamas insists on an end of the war in exchange for a return of the hostages. Israel can say correctly that, well, if the war ending means we leave Gaza and Hamas remains in power, which they would, devastated that they are, they would. Well, we can't have that. And that makes sense. However, Israel itself is causing that to be by refusing to talk about a day after and refusing to play along with a plan that is the only plan, which is a rejuvenated and revised and re-energized and perhaps rejiggered Palestinian Authority returning to Gaza from whence they were expelled in 2007. Now, they don't do that because Bibi's threatened by the far right, maybe that's the reason. But they can't do it. They can't say those words. Without that, then an end to the war means Hamas staying in power, which no one wants. So the actual logjam is with Israel's refusal to talk about the day after and to work with the world to create a day after plan. I assure you, if they did, then with rapid speed, the pressure on Hamas and on Qatar and on everyone who needs to be pressured would be overpowering. I mean, the entire edifice of global pressure would come down to bear. But right now, nothing can happen because of this problem.
All right, well, we're going to be coming back to you shortly, Dan. We're going to be turning to another appointment that is just made by the United States. It looks like Mike Huckabee is set to be the new U.S. ambassador to Israel. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has announced his decision to nominate the former Arkansas governor, who's a longtime backer of the settlement enterprise in the West Bank and is known to be one of the evangelical Christian community's most ardent supporters of the state of Israel. He even refers to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria, its biblical name. We have more in this next report.
After his sweeping victory in the US elections, Donald Trump is wasting no time dishing out his top roles. A preview of what his administration will look like, especially in regards to Israel. Trump has picked former Arkansas governor and 2016 presidential rival Mike Huckabee as his ambassador to Israel. An evangelical Christian, Huckabee is the first non-Jew to be the ambassador to Israel since James Cunningham in Obama's first term. He is, however, a hardline supporter of Israel.
For me, on a personal level, this is an extraordinary opportunity to be able to represent my country to a land that I have loved since I first visited there in July of 1973.
Huckabee claims to have taken tens of thousands of Americans to visit Israel over the last 50 years, including last Christmas, where he took a group of evangelical leaders to Israel's destroyed communities on the Gaza border. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of his appointment is his long-lasting support for the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, going against the US's condemnatory stance. He has appeared at events in support of settlements, telling the media there is no such thing as a settlement and that Israel has stronger ties to the West Bank than the US does to Manhattan, as well as calling the West Bank by its biblical name, Judea and Samaria.
Well, I have been, as you know, a frequent visitor to Judea and Samaria. I also very much believe that the people of Israel deserve a secure and safe country. And anything I can do that will help accommodate that is going to be a great privilege for me.
But despite his personal beliefs, Huckabee insists that he will not be the one making the final decisions.
I won't make the policy. I will carry out the policy of the president. But he has already demonstrated in his first term that there's never been an American president that has been more helpful in securing an understanding of the sovereignty of Israel.
Elsewhere, real estate investor and Trump's golfing partner Stephen Witkoff has been named as Trump's Middle East envoy, and Fox News host and Army officer Pete Hegseth will be the new defense secretary. Alongside the pro-Israel hawk Marco Rubio, who was tapped up as Secretary of State, and Representative Elise Stefanik as ambassador to the UN, it is clear where Trump stands when it comes to the Jewish state.
So how are Palestinians reacting to the news of Mike Huckabee's appointment? Well, joining us now is Fatah activist Samer Sinijlawi. Samer, Mike Huckabee has appeared at events in support of settlements, telling the media that there's no such thing as a settlement and that Israel has stronger ties to the West Bank than the U.S. does to Manhattan. I mean, he even refers to the West Bank by its biblical name, Judea and Samaria, like we mentioned. The Israeli government's most far-right leaders are already celebrating. They think that this is now going to be a chance for Israel to apply sovereignty to the settlements in the West Bank. What is your take on what Huckabee's appointment is ultimately going to mean for the Palestinians and the future of Palestinian statehood?
Well, first of all, the final decision of where does Israel go, to annexation or to separation from Palestinians, does not really depend on the American ambassador to Israel, with all the respect. It depends on the Israeli people themselves. He cannot be more Catholic than the Pope. He cannot be, representing the majority of the Israelis more than the Israelis themselves. I am a person that knows most of the Israelis. I know a lot of Israelis from left, center, and right, and I can tell you that Israelis do not really prefer annexation. Well, there is a certain percentage of the Israeli society that, from a ideological background and some historical theories, they do believe that they should annex the West Bank and maybe Gaza and maybe even some parts of other places surrounding Israel. But it does not really mean that the majorities of Israelis are going to this direction.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's very hard to guess what will be the stand of Trump. Trump, nobody can manage him. I don't think that the administration and the ambassadors of Trump will be really those who have the driving wheel in their hands. It's Trump himself. And when Trump himself decides a certain direction, it will be, everybody will start to, I believe, what the nominated new American ambassador is saying. He will implement the strategies of Trump.
Summer,
Nobody really can now.
That brings me actually to the next question. Trump is in support of a two-state solution. He definitely wants to make a mark in the last 4 years as president, perhaps by sealing the deal of this century and bringing peace to the Middle East. Do you think that his deep desire to secure his legacy is actually going to make that happen? And what do Palestinians think? What does the Palestinian public believe?
Well, I think, yes, he's killing. And even I do not waive the option that maybe Netanyahu will go in such a direction. I think Trump, he was better than President Biden. At least he presented a plan in 180 pages. Okay, it was talking about a principle of two states. Maybe the plan did not really give this state some sovereignty, complete sovereignty, or it gave a lot of parts of the West Bank to be annexed to Israel, but at least he provided something. For me, he's better than Biden. Biden was the worst options we have ever faced as Israelis and Palestinians. I can see Trump as a better option. We need to wait and see which direction he chooses to go.
All right. Unfortunately, we have to go out for a quick commercial break, but very interesting to hear your insight. We'll be back shortly.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Ya toda la gente que va a estar por el sector inmediatamente acudirá al punto.
Gran cantidad de envoltorios de papel periódico tipo quete.
And we're back on Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for sticking with us. Well, the IDF has ramped up its offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon, saying that it's dismantled the majority of the terror group's weapons and storage facilities. Now, this announcement comes just hours after 2 Israelis were killed in a rocket barrage in northern Israel. And we have more in this report from Emma Siegel.
On Wednesday morning, the IDF said it hit Hezbollah facilities in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. Lebanon's health ministry is reporting several dead in the densely populated area, but did not specify whether those killed were civilians or members of the terrorist organization. This comes just hours after the IDF called on Lebanese civilians to leave the area ahead of the strikes against Hezbollah assets. Yesterday, Israel announced it had dismantled the majority of Hezbollah's weapons storage and missile manufacturing facilities located under the Dahia district. Footage shows secondary explosions from the airstrikes, proving the existence of Hezbollah's explosive weapons in the vicinity. An infographic published by the IDF shows one of the primary targets beneath a complex of 5 residential buildings. The site was intended to produce weapon components, including long-range precision missiles capable of striking anywhere in Israel. But as the IDF continues to dismantle Hezbollah's capabilities, Israel faced numerous rocket barrages from Lebanon throughout the entirety of Tuesday. While many rockets were intercepted or fell in open areas, one directly impacted a warehouse in the northern coastal city of Nahariya, killing 2 men in their 50s. Zif Belfair and Shimon Najam were pronounced dead at the scene next to the warehouse that suffered a direct hit.
It just surprised us because there is a shelter here 10 steps from where it happened, and it's better to always go into the shelter, and knowing him, there's no chance he wouldn't have gone to the shelter. And so the whole story is even more painful because really, if he had had the time, I believe he would have entered a shelter and could have been saved.
And now Lebanon says it is awaiting concrete ceasefire proposals after a senior U.S. official said he saw a shot at a truce deal. But despite this, deadly rocket attacks persist in northern Israel.
Well, joining us now from northern Israel is our correspondent Emmanuel Honorat. What is the latest? I mean, Hezbollah claims that it launched a drone attack targeting Israel's military headquarters and defense ministry in central Tel Aviv this afternoon, but there hasn't been any indication that that actually happened. How much rocket fire have we actually seen today into Israel?
Right, Natasha. Well, actually, you're right. On the Israeli side, there hasn't been any confirmation of this drone attack that Hezbollah claimed on the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv. But earlier today, at nearly around 6 o'clock, we actually heard interceptions of rockets, but headed towards central Israel. So that actually didn't stop Hezbollah from targeting, or at least trying to target, the 8200 unit headquarters outside of Tel Aviv earlier today. And in fact, earlier and before that, the IDF announced that around 40 projectiles had been launched from South Lebanon by Hezbollah towards northern Israel. And that was before Hezbollah launched the rockets toward central Israel. Now, around 7 o'clock, the IDF also released a statement and footage, in fact, of an operation that it conducted against Hezbollah's naval unit, and said that it killed 2 Hezbollah operatives in the headquarters in Beirut. So that only really goes to show that the IDF operation is still very much ongoing, still very active. And this is really coming amid a concerted effort by the U.S., by U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein, who's been, as we've seen over the course of the past year, doing this shuttle diplomacy between Israel, the U.S., and Lebanon, trying to get a ceasefire deal between Hezbollah and Israel. Natasha.
All right, Emmanuel, thank you for joining us for that update. We're going to be turning to new news from the United States. It comes... Everything that you just heard comes as incoming President Trump has also selected Fox News host and Army veteran Pete Hegseth to serve as his defense secretary, who, if he is confirmed by the Senate, is going to certainly play a major role in how the U.S. handles Israel's ongoing war against Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and its proxies in the Middle East. So I'd like to just turn back to our international affairs analyst, Dan Perry. Obviously, some very interesting appointments in the past couple of days that are being celebrated by Israelis. In what appears to be, really a very pro-Israel incoming American administration. The question is, what can we expect out of leaders like Hegseth, for example?
It's all basically pro-Israel. There's no one there who's not pro-Israel, but there's a big difference between pro-Israel and being pro the current government and its policies. Most of the government's critics in Israel itself, probably majority of the country, are themselves pro-Israel. So these appointments are all over the place. Hegseth is a strange one. He's a captain, not a general, in the army, and he's a Fox host. His big thing, I think, will not be necessarily at least in the short term, the Middle East, but rather the culture wars in the U.S. He wants to cancel woke initiatives in the army and stuff like that. But if you look at the other appointments, with Trump, because there is a perceived need to sort of set guardrails for him and prevent madness from happening, there's basically two types of appointments. One that enable Trumpness, and the other would be along the lines of classical establishment Republicans who would promote a foreign policy and a domestic policy that we know and that takes into account, basic logic and expertise. We see elements of both here. You have Huckabee, who wants Israel to annex the West Bank, which would be a disaster for Israel, but he's careful to say that he's only speaking on behalf of himself. And you have Rubio, who's very pro-Israel, but he's a Secretary of State, but he's pro-Israel in a way that almost everyone in Israel can sign on to. He understands Hamas needs to be eradicated, even for the benefit of the Palestinians themselves. That doesn't mean he doesn't favor a two-state solution, which Trump himself favors. And then you have like Witkoff, the envoy to the Middle East, crony, real estate guy, wants to do a real estate deal. And basically he, I think, will be tasked with doing what Biden failed to do, which is completing the Abraham Accords to bring in Saudi Arabia. Well, that would require at least progress on the Palestinian front. So I think if you're pro-Israel in the general sense, you should be celebrating. If you want right-wing policies vis-a-vis the West Bank to necessarily prevail, maybe less so. If you think any of these guys are going to enable a forever war that some suspect Netanyahu wants in Gaza in order to delay an accounting over the debacle of October 7th, I think they're in for a very grave disappointment.
All right, Dan, we're going to be coming back to you shortly. We're turning to Syria now, where American forces have carried out strikes against weapon targets linked to an Iran-backed group in Syria on Tuesday. 5 fighters were killed in these strikes, and the U.S. Central Command says that the raids were in response to a rocket attack on U.S. troops in the country. Now, the previous day, U.S. forces also bombed 9 targets associated with Iran-backed groups in response to recent drone and rocket attacks. That's according to the Pentagon. And this comes as Russia has also asked Israel to avoid launching aerial strikes as part of its war against Lebanon's Hezbollah near one of Moscow's bases in Syria today. Well, joining us now is Omar al-Muqdad, a Syrian journalist and filmmaker. Omar, we are seeing an escalation in fighting between the United States, Israel, and Iran-backed groups in Syria. How concerned are local Syrians about how this could spill over?
Well, thanks for having me on. In fact, of course, the Syrian people in general and the Syrian opposition in particular, we are very concerned and not happy about Iran's role in Syria. And, Iran has backed Bashar Assad for 10 years. They carried out a sectarian massacres against Syrian towns and cities, and they have blood on their hands in Syria. And now they are backing all these sectarian militias all over the country, and they are seizing the power in Damascus in their favor. They are turning the country into a battlefield for their own interests and their own projects. But what Iran is trying to do, and its proxies, it's trying to tell the United States and Israel that we still here in Syria, and we can move these proxies at any moment of time, that at any time we want, and we wish, and put them into actions. Unfortunately, it's true that Bashar Assad, over the last few months, tried to neutralize himself from what's going on in Gaza and Lebanon from this war, because he received a direct threat message from Bibi Netanyahu that Bashar Assad himself is going to be targeted if he participated in this war directly or indirectly. But that nonetheless, that doesn't mean Iran is not deeply rooted inside the Syrian regime, and they're trying. And he knew that even if he now is standing in the middle between this issue, like not participating directly in what's going on in this war, but at the same time, he is a puppet of Iran, and Iran can simply use Syria at any time they want, as we witnessed over the last few days by these drone attacks on the United States bases. And Iran is still adopting this reckless behavior in Syria, and I don't know how this is going to escalate. Maybe they are saving the Syrian fronts to the last moment. We know that they use Yemen, they use Lebanon, they use the air proxies in Gaza. They use all these militias that they can move them anytime they want.
Right.
But for Syria at this moment, it seems like really vague why they're not using the Syrian front yet. Maybe they are saving it to the last, as a last desperate hope.
Well, just a quick update here. There are suspected Israeli airstrikes right now near the Syria-Lebanese border as we speak. You know, I'm interested to hear what we're hearing from the Syrian government, if anything, in response to these ongoing strikes.
Hello?
Hi, Omar, can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Actually, the Syrian regime seems that he cannot, at this point, make any direct statements that can be read by Israel and its backers as a threat, or he is going to engage directly with this war, because he knows that his regime is going to be under immense threat. Bashar Assad himself can become a target at this point. So he is trying just to, as I mentioned before, to isolate himself from all this, and to say, look, I'm not going to do anything, but at the same time, he can't anger Iran because Iran is catching the guy from his neck. So it's hard for him. He really found himself in an awkward position at this point, and this is what you get when you fight against your own people.
How does the Syrian public see Israel's war with Hezbollah and Hamas and these continued strikes on Iran-backed militia groups that are located bordering Lebanon?
Well, for many of the Syrian opposition, we think of Hamas as and Hezbollah. These are Iran puppets, and it must be taken out of the scene. That's definitely true. But of course, a lot of people are not happy about the civilian losses in this engagement over Gaza or even in Lebanon. And it's really, I find it really troubling that the IDF or the Israeli army must be more careful targeting these militias. You know, we're not a big fan of Hamas or Hezbollah. And if you ask any Syrian opposition figure, 15 million Syrians, at least I can speak on their behalf, would tell you that these are, for us, the terrorist organizations. They participated in massacres in Syria against the Syrian people, against the Syrian towns and cities. 15 million, they were spearhead of Iran war against the Syrian people. So, of course, we're not a big fan of these militias, and we think they really take the region hostage, and they must be taken out of the scene. But at the same time, as we're talking about this, the human losses civilians lives must be preserved and protected at all costs, because that would increase the popularity of this organization, the more human civilian losses that we would have on the ground in these areas.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you, Omar, so much for joining us. Very fascinating to hear your take on the ongoing strikes that we're seeing in Syria. Hopefully, we're going to have you back soon. We're turning to another story here. Breaking news to absolutely nobody. Turkish President Erdogan has just announced that Turkey is going to be officially severing ties with Israel. The Turkish president has positioned himself as a vocal critic of Israel in recent years, and this latest diplomatic break may have consequences for Turkey's relations with Western allies, including the United States. So I'd like to turn back to our international affairs analyst, Dan Perry, on this. Dan, this is certainly no shocker, but what does it really tell us about Turkey's geopolitical future, per se, and where it is trying to position itself?
I think this is one more data point that shows the damage that Erdogan and his regime, which is not that popular, they have maybe 50% support, is bringing to Turkey. And the list is long. The evisceration of Turkey's democracy, the damage they've done to the economy, the near rupture of ties with, or any potential for accession to the European Union. And now we see a NATO member breaking ties with Israel. I don't know if it's permanent. I think ties have been sufficiently degraded that the potential damage to Israel in terms of the billions of dollars in import-export trade that there was, and of course the military cooperation and joint training, which at one time was really significant, is no longer that great. I think Israel can weather a temporary or maybe even permanent straining of these ties. If I zoom out and look at it beyond the question of Israel, to me this is very, very worrying for Turkey itself, actually.
Will this have any major practical impact on Israelis?
Well, that's what I mean. The military no longer depends on joint maneuvers with the army in Turkey. Right. And the Israeli economy, this won't help, but the Israeli economy has been battered in a variety of ways that are bigger. It's certainly not good news. Israel benefits tremendously from good ties with a Muslim country of 80 million people that's reasonably modern and quite close by, and has great impact on what happens in Syria, which is a neighbor of Israel, and Iraq. But I think it's weatherable. I think it's unfortunate. I think it also is just Erdogan and not Turkey. This does not represent the people of Turkey. Right. So I would hope that one day Erdogan is gone, a hope I could extend to other leaders in the world. No one is temporary, and Turkey may one day return to normalcy.
All right, Dan, we're going to be turning to COP29. Might have a question for you about this right afterwards. It is day 2 of the COP29 climate summit in Baku, Azerbaijan, as global leaders gather to address the climate challenges facing the planet. And our Alex Schloss has the details.
World leaders are flooding into Azerbaijan's capital of Baku for the UN-sponsored 2024 COP29 climate summit. This year, with a focus on climate funding.
There is no time to lose. On climate finance, the world must pay up or humanity will pay the price.
By tradition, the UN Climate Summit is supposed to take place in a different part of the world each year, and this year, Azerbaijan's selection has drawn criticisms. Every year, members of the COP29 are required to reach a consensus on who will host the summit, and after months of debate and Russia's blocking of every member that condemned its invasion of Ukraine, only Armenia and Azerbaijan remained as options. And when Russia brokered a prisoner exchange between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Yerevan dropped its blocking of Azerbaijan's bid.
4 years ago, we celebrated the historical victory in the Second Karabakh War. A year ago, we fully restored our sovereignty in accordance with UN Charter, international law, UN Security Council resolutions, which remained on paper for 30 years. We implemented these resolutions ourselves, restored international law, justice, and put an end to Armenian occupation. As the president of COP29, Azerbaijan will do its best to find common understanding between developed and developing countries, between Global South and Global North.
It won't be lost on any of the attendees in Baku that the climate change talks are being hosted by a country whose economy relies almost entirely on the fossil fuel industry. Dozens of activists protested inside the COP29 venue in Baku on Monday, holding banners calling for climate justice. And also, despite Azerbaijan's role in ethnic cleansing of over 100,000 ethnic Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh in late 2023, protesters have zeroed in on the ongoing Israel-Hamas war.
COP29 opens as we know the world hurtles towards 3 degrees of warming. And at the same time, we see a live televised genocide taking place in Palestine. we all understand that there can be no climate justice without human rights. If we can't stop the genocide in Palestine, we will not be able to stop the genocide that is coming in terms of climate violence.
İsrail saldırıları nedeniyle
The chemicals leaching into the soil and groundwater due to Israel's attacks have already darkened the future of Gazan children. We think that those who are causing this heavy humanitarian and environmental catastrophe should give account for this at international courts.
uluslararası mahkemelerde
Israel is sending a delegation of some 100 representatives, including 3 ministers. President Isaac Herzog will arrive for the second week of the conference to emphasize the importance Israel attaches to global issues being discussed.
I'd like to turn back to our guest, Dan Perry. All right, so obviously Azerbaijan made some waves when it fought to become the host of this summit. Given its own track record with climate change policy, definitely not the best. Give us some background here.
I mean, it really is, they're a little bit cartoonish sometimes. You listen to Aliyev talking about Israel's climate policies. This is a state that fought to host a COP29, even while doubling down on fossil fuels, which he did in his opening address as well. It's beyond belief. Moreover, they fought for all this global attention about 2 or 3 weeks, shortly after being widely accused of what is seen as an ethnic cleansing of 120 Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. So they, I think, unwisely sought all this attention, and they're kind of getting it because Azerbaijan is a reflection of the absurdity at this point of a petro-kleptocracy hosting a climate conference. And there's talk now of what is the exact connection between climate policy and human rights. And the focus is on Azerbaijan's record as one of the worst abusers of human rights on the planet and maybe in history. I don't think that's the result they wanted from hosting COP29. Of course, it puts Israel in an awkward position because they're a useful ally of Israel's as well.
Right. Next week, Herzog is planning to head to the summit, is expected to be met with major protests. I mean, what can we expect out of Israel's presence at this summit?
Well, I mean, wherever Israeli officials go, there's going to be protests at this point. I think it may bring for Israel its own brand of unwelcome attention because of the alliance that it has with this country that is undoubtedly useful for Israel because it sells it oil, buys Israeli weapons, and gives Israel a forward base bordering Iran. So there's a lot of realpolitik going down with that alliance, but it's awkward because that regime is odious in the extreme.
All right, Dan, we are going to turn to another story right now. As the Somali breakaway region of Somaliland heads to elections, the self-declared republic faces a crucial moment in its quest for stability and international recognition. With the history of peaceful transitions of power, these elections are really seen as a key test for the region's democratic institutions. And our producer, Alex Schloss, has the details.
With over 1 million registered voters, voting is underway for a new president for the next 5 years. But unlike the recent string of elections around the world, from the US to Japan, this one is happening in the unrecognized breakaway region of Somalia, Somaliland. 3 candidates will face off in the elections, with each seeking to consolidate the region's fragile democracy, boost economic growth, and gain the international recognition that the territory has struggled to secure for 33 years. Despite this, Somaliland has maintained relative stability and de facto independence, a stark contrast from the rest of Somalia, marred by violence.
Somaliland is a full functioning government. It has political parties. It has currencies. It's different from Somalia. It has stability. It has everything that government needs, all the elements of the state, so that international community should support Somaliland. They should look Somaliland because Somaliland is a stable country. It's a democratic country.
Wednesday's vote comes amid heightened tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia over an agreement that Ethiopia signed with Somaliland. That deal would grant Ethiopia 50 years of access to 20 kilometers of Red Sea coastline in exchange for potential recognition of Somaliland independence, drawing the ire of Mogadishu.
The Memorandum of Understanding between Somaliland and Ethiopia is not a problem for security in the Horn of Africa. There are countries that disagree, but it is something that can bring development and recognition to Somaliland.
This is the fourth presidential election since the region broke away from the rest of the country in 1991. The territory declared independence that year, but has never achieved the much sought-after international recognition.
All right, now before we end the show, Dan, I know that you're wearing a very unique necklace today, and I wanted to ask you about it.
Pendant of some sort.
Yes, what is that? First of all, show the camera. Yeah.
Here, yeah.
Run for their lives. That's what it says.
Look, I mean, Israelis can grow despondent after this year and more of terrible, terrible times, and there's a sense that no one in the world supports us. But this group, it's mostly supporters of Israel, I'm sure. But we're talking about many thousands of people in about 230 locations, I think, all over the world, from South Africa to the Netherlands to all over North America. Once a week they get together, they do runs, they do walks, they show photos of the hostages and flags and other paraphernalia. And there's been no incident, and they get support, and it's been a viral movement, and they'd like to grow it. So anyone interested in joining or starting up a new location, I think it's Run 4 Lives, numeral4.org, and that'll take you onwards and upwards.
All right. Well, thank you for teaching us about that. That is it for now from the desk at Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchak. We'll see you next time.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome to the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. It is now 404 days that 101 hostages remain captive in Gaza, held hostage by Hamas and other terror groups. Today, a sign of life from one just 2 days after his 29th birthday. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group releases a video of hostage Alexander Sasha Trufanov, a Russian-Israeli, kidnapped on October 7th from kibbutz near Oz after the murder of his father, Vitali. Now, last May, his captors, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, did release 2 videos of Trufanov. In this third one, he identifies himself as being 28, indicating it was filmed before this week. Now, the family has authorized showing the tape. In parts of it, he talks about the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza and against military operations there, likely at the instructions of his PIJ guards. But he also had this to say.
אני מבקש מכם, אזרחי ישראל, בבקשה, בבקשה, אל תברחו מאיתנו. אני מבקש מכם, אזרחי ישראל, בבקשה, בבקשה תצאו, תעשו ותפגינו. אני רוצה להודות לכם על ההפגנות שעשיתם כל שבוע, בשבת. אבל אני רוצה גם להגיד לכם, שנה שלמה שאתם מפגינים ועושים, ולממשלה לא באמת אכפת. עובדה, הנה אנחנו פה. אני חושב שאולי הגיע הזמן להגביר את ההפגנות. אני מבקש מכם, תצאו, תסגרו את הרחובות למשך תקופה. תעצו ותעשו שביתה למשך תקופה. תזכרו אותנו, אל תשכחו אותנו. אנחנו נמצאים פה בעזה בסכנה יומיומית, במצב קשה. בבקשה, בבקשה תפעלו ותעשו כל מה שאפשר כדי שתוכלו להחזיר אותנו בריאים ושלמים הביתה.
Well, let's go out and see the scenes of those demonstrations at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, and our correspondent Nicole Tzedek. And Nicole, always difficult dealing with these videos, tapes of the hostages. Some comments by Sasha Trufanov may have been coerced by PIJ. Others perhaps speaking from the heart, especially that last comment about the demonstrations. And you wonder how the people out there are responding to that.
It's surprising, Kalev, actually, because after hearing that video and hearing Sasha's pleas, whether they were coerced or not, surprisingly, we're not seeing any signs of demonstration out here at Hostages Square tonight, or even a few blocks away at the Kiryat, the IDF headquarters here in Tel Aviv. I walked there to see if there was a demonstration, as usually these are the 2 places that we do see people taking to the streets. But today, you can see behind me a pretty empty square. And unfortunately, this is the scenes that we see more regularly. However, I will note that it's Saturday nights when we see these weekly demonstrations that we could expect to see an uptick in attendance following the release of this propaganda video of Sasha Trufanov. And not only is it him who's playing in that video that the PIJ released, but then following that video as well, his mother, Lana, who was released during the November hostage release deal last November, nearly a year ago now. She also commented on that video and said, on the one hand, it is a sign of life of her son, but on the other hand, it shows just how horrific the conditions he's being kept in, and still is calling on the citizens of Israel to not forget her son, to not forget the 101 hostages, and to come out, demonstrate, and make sure their voices are heard. And we do have another group also of the members of the Hostages and Missing Families Forum that are actually in the United States right now. Family members of the 7 American Israeli hostages, they're meeting and set to meet with Biden later today to continue to try and voice this plea for the United States to back a deal as well.
Right, and you do have to wonder if there is some just exhaustion creeping in, Nicole. There was a rally in the U.S. over the last weekend where attendance was much smaller in Washington, D.C. than expected. And maybe there is a kind of exhaustion among the hostage families and their supporters as this drags on.
Certainly seems to be the case, and it's not only them that are exhausted, and for many of those family members, they say as this does drag on, if you're exhausted, just think of the condition that those hostages are held in. And so no matter how tired anyone is, they're saying that that's even more of a reason to put into perspective what these hostages are going through and still come out and demonstrate.
All right, Nicole Tzedek there at Hostages Square, Tel Aviv. Thank you for that, Nicole. Now, as Nicole mentioned, there are a group of hostage families. These are the families of American Israeli hostages held in Gaza. They are going to meet, hopefully, with President Biden later today. Yesterday, they did speak to media, urging Biden officials to work with their counterparts in the upcoming incoming Trump administration in order to secure a deal before President-elect Trump takes office in January. Here's some of what they had to say there in D.C.
There simply is no more time for the 101 Israeli hostages, those who still may be alive, and recovering the remains of those who have already been murdered by Hamas. Waiting for a new administration to come in is tantamount to a death sentence for our loved ones and the ability to retrieve those bodies that are still in Gaza.
I would give the Biden administration an A+ on effort and relationship with the families, but at the end of the line, we're still here after 400 days. So they have not succeeded in delivering what they should, which is bringing back U.S. hostages out of Gaza. We are looking for that recommitment from the president-elect, we hope as soon as possible, to state again his commitment to bring back U.S. hostages before January 20th. If not, God help us all.
And joining us in the studio for more is Reserves Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital. He's the former commander of Special Forces in the IDF, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran. And as I said, Doron, it's so difficult to know what to do with these recordings that are being put out either by Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We should stress the family. This was a decision. The mother, as we heard, of Sasha Trufanov wanting this to be out there. There were some things we didn't show relating to him speaking out over concern that he may be killed in a military operation to rescue him. We don't know about, how much of this is his sincere feelings, how much he's being coerced, but certainly perhaps in that last bit calling for demonstrations out in the streets, in that part he did sound sincere.
Yeah, and I think it matters less. For us, it's a proof of life, an indication that he's alive. It's very important. Indication that adds up to the knowledge that we have of those hostages that are alive. Surely, we know the situation, and it's heartbreaking to hear it, and we have to try to do whatever we can. We hope that at least half of the 101 or hostages that are there are alive. He's one of them. They are scattered, as we see. This is Islamic Jihad.
Right, and not all held by Hamas. And in fact, there have been some claims by sources, reported sources, saying Hamas doesn't even know where all the hostages are.
Exactly. So this is exactly. So there has to be a knowledge base where everybody is and who can really facilitate an exchange. If there is a deal, it's not an easy task, the whole thing. But basically, it adds up to the question of the day after in Gaza. When would it end? What would be the condition, whether a hostage deal is still at the horizon, which is very important.
Very important. We'll be talking about the Trump administration, the incoming, but keep in mind, President-elect Trump supposedly told the Prime Minister Netanyahu to wrap it up in Gaza, do what you have to do. Yeah. We'll see how that actually plays out. Ariel, part of the problem, of course, in the negotiations is the current state of Hamas. There have been reports back and forth this week about whether Qatar has actually told Hamas that they have to evacuate, remove themselves from Qatar, which has been sort of their headquarters outside Gaza. And now a somewhat more reliable source weighing in after Qatar's denial of that, saying that, in fact, that has happened.
Yeah, so Secretary of State Antony Blinken talking to reporters today, confirming that Qatar has indeed asked or informed Hamas leadership in Doha to leave Qatar. This is contrary to denials by Qatar that they have informed the leadership of Hamas to leave. This was a condition set out by the United States, saying that if Hamas were to refuse a deal, at some point they would urge Qatar to expel Hamas leadership from Doha. And so despite denials by the Qataris, Secretary of State Blinken confirming that this request or this call has indeed been issued. No confirmation yet by Hamas or Qatar for this statement by Secretary Blinken. In recent months, there were reports that Hamas was looking for alternative for
which
a new
would be
home,
where? Which would be where?
Which would be either in Turkey or in Iran or in Algeria, a bunch of various options. Nothing confirmed as of yet. But when the outgoing Secretary of State says that Qatar did tell Hamas leadership to leave Doha, it does raise the credibility of such reports, despite Qatari denials.
And again, all this may also be tied into the change of government in the U.S. Let's, in fact, stay focused for a bit on U.S.-Israel relations and the issue of Gaza. Now, the Biden administration has decided that it will not withhold weapons shipments to Israel as a 30-day deadline for Jerusalem to significantly alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza expired today. Now, the U.S. says Israel has not breached American laws on blocking aid supplies, although the administration cautions it will be monitoring the humanitarian situation in Gaza to check if Israel keeps the aid flowing in. Emily Francis has more on that in this report.
Outgoing President Joe Biden is doubling down before his term ends by not withholding weapons to Israel. This as the deadline passes to address the humanitarian aid crisis to Gazans.
We at this time have not made an assessment that that the Israelis are in violation of U.S. law. But most importantly, we are going to continue to watch how these steps that they've taken, how they are being implemented.
Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog met President Biden yesterday at the White House, thanking him for his support of Israel since the October 7th massacre.
Welcome back to the Oval Office in the White House. You've been a friend for a long time, a personal friend, and you know my commitment to Israel is ironclad, and we share a deep friendship. I want to thank you again for being here, and the floor is yours.
As we say in Hebrew, Toda Rabba. You've been an incredible friend of Israel and the Jewish people for decades, and we will never forget, ever in history, how you stood up with us in our darkest hour.
At the same time, a less friendly environment at the United Nations in New York. Envoys from various countries addressed the UN Security Council yesterday, condemning Israel for an alleged humanitarian disaster in Gaza and proposing a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire.
Most of Gaza is now a wasteland of rubble. What distinction was made and what precautions were taken if more than 70% of civilian housing is either damaged or destroyed? This has led to increasing hunger, starvation, and now, as we have heard, potentially famine.
Israeli lawmakers in the Knesset passed a law earlier this month limiting operations of the UNRWA Palestinian Aid Agency in Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. This as UNRWA volunteers are being investigated for their involvement in the October 7th massacre.
Israel has taken some important steps, including restoring aid deliveries to the north. Still, Israel must ensure its actions are fully implemented and its improvements sustained over time.
Israel insists it has delivered life-saving humanitarian aid, including allowing a polio vaccination campaign for over 500,000 Gazan children.
We need to see real and extended pauses in large areas of Gaza, pauses in any fighting, in any combat, so that the assistance can effectively get to people who need it.
As for food and supplies, Israeli authorities say Hamas operatives continue to raid and steal what's meant for civilians.
It is an exercise in slander, disguised as humanitarian concern. The IPC's latest report echoes one of the most unfounded, slanderous accusations against the state of Israel throughout this conflict.
Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, insists that the figures show the humanitarian situation in Gaza has improved substantially in recent months.
Israel has been proactive in supporting Gaza's food supply chain, with 3 million pita loaves produced daily. Additionally, 6 tankers of cooking gas have recently entered Gaza to sustain essential infrastructure.
Doron, perhaps Israel dodged the bullet or gained the bullet, however you want to put it, in moving, it seems, very quickly, almost at the last minute, to reopen another border crossing, to boost the aid. But all this, I want to tie it in more with the bigger picture. Your remark earlier about the need for a day-after plan, especially in northern Gaza, because the aid does come. You see it there. You see the trucks at the crossings. It's what happens when the aid passes through those crossings into Gaza, and the distribution system, which still has to be set up in some way outside of the control of Hamas.
Yeah, the bottleneck is the distribution, the fact that much of the aid has been taken by Hamas, and Hamas uses it in order to financially have some financial gains. But in general, I think we shouldn't play games here. The problem is in the north, because we had this attempt to try to mobilize some of the citizens to the south and keep only the Hamas members there. I'm not sure. We should be very careful not to play with humanitarian aid. I said it from the onset of this operation. This is what gives us the credibility and the backing of our allies to continue fighting Hamas. And whenever we are trying to maneuver or play with it, we shouldn't do it. So I hope we succeeded, and then that we open Kisufim. You talked about the Kisufim.
Right, a new entry point.
A new entry point. So in the context of where the game right now is, the war game, just keep the aid in and then start to think about the day after.
Right, and I just want to go to Ariel a bit on that, because a key to that is getting other Arab countries, led by Saudi Arabia perhaps, and some of the Gulf countries, to take an active role. And yet, from Saudi Arabia, from particularly Mohammed bin Salman, increasingly harsh rhetoric against Israel, really sort of tying everything to the Palestinian issue.
Not just Saudi Arabia. We saw earlier this week there was the Arab Muslim countries summit, 50 delegations. And in the final statement of the summit, which all the parties signed on to, they, in a unison, in one unified voice, called what Israel is doing in Gaza called a genocide, saying that calling to freeze Israel's membership in the United Nations, and also calling for establishing some sort of day-after mechanism with the involvement of Arab countries. They didn't get too much into the details of the day after, whereas they did get into the details of the steps that they want to see taken against Israel. Another unfortunate sign that the Israeli dream of Israeli-Saudi normalization isn't getting any closer despite Trump's re-election.
All right. Well, yes.
I wouldn't be so judgmental about it, because the prospect, we're talking about the future, and when Trump enters, I think he would try to push the Saudis back. But then we would have to make some concession with the Palestinians, and there's no way that Gaza, without some participation of the Palestinian Authority, is something that the Saudis or the Emirates, where everybody would step in to help, would agree that it would be without them. So we have to make a decision, because the junction is very clear. Either a military occupation of Gaza, which would be hard to keep and would never be accepted by our allies, or going forward to some kind of resolution day after, together with the allies in the area.
And again, we'll talk more in a bit, but that the re-entry of Donald Trump in the White House may change the whole equation. And in fact, the Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermott did meet yesterday in Washington with Secretary Blinken and the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. I'm sure this was one of the things they discussed a day after in Gaza, but also the diplomatic push to reach agreement on ending the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in the north. Meanwhile, the IDF has further expanded its ground operations in southern Lebanon as it continues to carry out airstrikes in Beirut, while Hezbollah fires scores of rockets and drones at northern Israel. Emma Siegel has the latest on the war in the north.
On Wednesday morning, the IDF said it hit Hezbollah facilities in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. Lebanon's health ministry is reporting several dead in the densely populated area, but did not specify whether those killed were civilians or members of the terrorist organization. This comes just hours after the IDF called on Lebanese civilians to leave the area ahead of the strikes against Hezbollah assets. Yesterday, Israel announced it had dismantled the majority of Hezbollah's weapons storage and missile manufacturing facilities located under the Dahia district. Footage shows secondary explosions from the airstrikes, proving the existence of Hezbollah's explosive weapons in the vicinity. An infographic published by the IDF shows one of the primary targets beneath a complex of 5 residential buildings. The site was intended to produce weapon components, including long-range precision missiles capable of striking anywhere in Israel. But as the IDF continues to dismantle Hezbollah's capabilities, Israel faced numerous rocket barrages from Lebanon throughout the entirety of Tuesday. While many rockets were intercepted or fell in open areas, one directly impacted a warehouse in the northern coastal city of Nahariya, killing 2 men in their 50s. Zif Belfair and Shimon Najam were pronounced dead at the scene next to the warehouse that suffered a direct hit.
It just surprised us because there is a shelter here 10 steps from where it happened, and it's better to always go into the shelter, and knowing him, there's no chance he wouldn't have gone to the shelter. And so the whole story is even more painful because really, if he had had the time, I believe he would have entered a shelter and could have been saved.
And now Lebanon says it is awaiting concrete ceasefire proposals after a senior U.S. official said he saw a shot at a truce deal. But despite this, deadly rocket attacks persist in northern Israel.
Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent, Emmanuel Honorat, is up in the north in the Haifa area. And thank God, no fatalities today, Emmanuel, but no rest either for residents of the north there. Just another day of barrages of rockets coming from Lebanon.
Right, Kalev. And earlier today, the IDF actually said there were 45 projectiles coming from South Lebanon by Hezbollah to northern Israel, but not just northern Israel, also central Israel, as you saw probably earlier today, that there were sirens all across central Israel, especially the Tel Aviv surrounding area. Now, Hezbollah said that it actually was targeting or attempted to target different headquarters, the 8200 unit intelligence, IDF headquarters, as well as the IDF headquarters right in the center of Tel Aviv. Now, it says that it was trying to target those sites, those locations with ballistic missiles, in fact. And actually, as of moments ago, the IDF also issued evacuation orders for 2 buildings in South Lebanon. Now, this is coming after ongoing fire exchange throughout the day and multiple evacuation orders that the IDF often claims that Hezbollah, these are Hezbollah sites, Hezbollah command centers, Hezbollah weapon depots that are often located in civilian areas. So the IDF is usually giving these evacuation orders in order to give time for the civilians in these areas to get to safety. Now, the IDF also released earlier an operation that they led against the Hezbollah's naval unit headquarters in Beirut that killed, according to the IDF, 2 Hezbollah operatives. This is really coming as a diplomatic push for a ceasefire deal between Hezbollah and Israel. Kalev.
All right, Emmanuel Honorat, thank you for that. And unfortunately, we do have breaking news now coming out of the battlefield in South Lebanon. The IDF announcing the death of 5 soldiers. Captain Itai Markovich, 22 years old, Staff Sergeant Sraya Elbaum, 21, Staff Sergeant Drohen, age 20, Staff Sergeant Nir Gopher, age 20, Sergeant Shalev Itzik Sagron, age 21, all from the Golani Brigade.
Just to add, there was a 6th soldier who died, but his name has not yet been cleared for publication. So we're talking about six soldiers, right. 5 whose names have been cleared.
And their own Golani Brigade, boys, what a dark day for the
Golani Brigade
Golani Brigade.
Celebrated military history, but in this war they suffered casualties that are unmatched, I think, to any other campaign in the past, in the beginning of in the 7th of October and the 8th, and then in Jabalia in many incidents, and then in South Lebanon. This is a brigade, I think, that suffered the most casualties, a very brave, courageous brigade. It's very heartbreaking to hear.
Right, fighting spirit of the Golani Brigade, but being in the front line and in the combat, they are paying a heavy price right now in South Lebanon. Let's talk a little more about, though, the IDF operations in Beirut area, because it does seem as if the IDF has sort of stepped up its direct attacks against Hezbollah targets in the Beirut area. The Israeli Navy getting involved, and unusual. Usually they operate more secretly, less publicly. And it looks like the IDF is maybe trying to hit targets in Beirut, maybe ahead of a potential ceasefire, taking the opportunity while they can.
Look, for at least 2 months straight, Israel has been targeting Hezbollah sites in Beirut, in the Lebanese capital. About an hour and a half ago, IDF spokesperson in Arabic issued an immediate evacuation warning to residents and buildings in 2 areas of Beirut's southern Dahia suburb, in Kharat Khrik and in Burj al-Barajna, saying that Hezbollah has sites there, and to evacuate 500 meters. This is perhaps a daily occurrence, and yes, I believe Israel is trying to maximize its achievements prior to the diplomatic agreement that hopefully is coming along. But I don't see any shift in the policy, whereas more of a continuation. What we are seeing, though, and this is reports coming out of Lebanese media, that Israeli ground forces have begun to deepen their operation in southern Lebanon, operating areas that they have not operated until now. This coincides with the announcements by the Israeli military that IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi approved operational plans to indeed deepen this operation. And so we see that the military efforts of Israel are not waiting for the diplomatic efforts, and Israel is continuing to try to deepen its degrading of Hezbollah capabilities, whether it's on the ground in southern Lebanon or its weapons manufacturing sites and command centers in Beirut. And we see now that, according to reports in Lebanon, they're even deepening further the ground operation.
All right, and again, just before we are going out for a break, I just want to repeat the breaking news we just had a minute ago. The IDF announcing the death of 6 soldiers from the Golani brigades. These were not reservists, but active soldiers fallen in combat in South Lebanon. That is a heavy toll for one day, and I think now Israel has going to start looking at where it's going to proceed in South Lebanon. Doron Avital, Ariel Osran, stay with us. We'll be right back.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today. Welcome back to the Rundown at I-24 News. And let's head over now to Washington, D.C., where Donald Trump made his first visit to the White House, back to the White House, since leaving it on January 20th, 2020, as President Joe Biden hosted the president-elect, who's been very busy filling the posts of his new administration. We'll have more on that later, but let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wackenheim, who was there at the White House. Mike, we saw a fire blazing. It looked like a lot warmer, friendlier atmosphere, warmer than when Donald Trump left the White House 4 years ago, that's for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if they put a good face on in front of the cameras or if it was a sincere attempt to kind of mend those fences. But indeed, Joe Biden and Donald Trump with quite a cordial meeting today, at least in front of the cameras. The meeting lasted an hour and 54 minutes in total. Some thought it would be in and out, essentially. Hey, welcome back, and you know where the bathroom is, and you can kind of head out now. But instead, almost 2 hours they sat down together, Biden and Trump exchanging a handshake at the top in front of the cameras. Biden saying welcome and congratulations on your election victory, and Trump saying, you know, politics is sometimes a tough world, but today it's not so tough. So at least, playing for the press, they got along just fine in that meeting. Biden wanting to display that he believes in the peaceful transition of power. Trump did not afford that same invitation to Biden 4 years ago to the White House. This is supposed to be a tradition where the sitting commander-in-chief welcomes in the incoming one. Biden actually had his inauguration after Trump skipped town, but different this time around as a president number 45 visits 46 in order to transition back to 47. So very surreal moment here. It was a circus press-wise. I've never seen it like this. Seemed like about 150 to 200 press outlets were here, all waiting with bated breath for Donald Trump to come out those doors right back there. Instead, he headed out the South Portico, same way he came in, and now is off to other ventures. He did arrive in Washington earlier this morning to meet with the incoming Republican Congress as well.
Right. And by the way, John Thune of South Dakota becoming the Senate Majority Leader, replacing Mitch McConnell there as the head of the Republicans. Now, Trump has been very busy. In contrast to his first term, the president-elect has been very quickly filling key posts of his second administration, including that of ambassador to Israel. Now, the name chosen is certainly a familiar one, but it's a surprising pick nonetheless. Mike Huckabee, the former Arkansas governor and evangelical conservative media commentator. His strong pro-Israel stance certainly aligns with that of Trump, but one of his fundamental views on the Mideast may spur controversy in this region and back home. Joe Brown explains.
After his sweeping victory in the US elections, Donald Trump is wasting no time dishing out his top roles. A preview of what his administration will look like, especially in regards to Israel. Trump has picked former Arkansas governor and 2016 presidential rival Mike Huckabee as his ambassador to Israel. An evangelical Christian, Huckabee is the first non-Jew to be the ambassador to Israel since James Cunningham in Obama's first term. He is, however, a hardline supporter of Israel.
For me, on a personal level, this is an extraordinary opportunity to be able to represent my country to a land that I have loved since I first visited there in July of 1973.
Huckabee claims to have taken tens of thousands of Americans to visit Israel over the last 50 years, including last Christmas, where he took a group of evangelical leaders to Israel's destroyed communities on the Gaza border. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of his appointment is his long-lasting support for the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, going against the US's condemnatory stance. He has appeared at events in support of settlements, telling the media there is no such thing as a settlement and that Israel has stronger ties to the West Bank than the US does to Manhattan, as well as calling the West Bank by its biblical name, Judea and Samaria.
Well, I have been, as you know, a frequent visitor to Judea and Samaria. I also very much believe that the people of Israel deserve a secure and safe country. And anything I can do that will help accommodate that is going to be a great privilege for me.
But despite his personal beliefs, Huckabee insists that he will not be the one making the final decisions.
I won't make the policy. I will carry out the policy of the president. But he has already demonstrated in his first term that there's never been an American president that has been more helpful in securing an understanding of the sovereignty of Israel.
Elsewhere, real estate investor and Trump's golfing partner Stephen Witkoff has been named as Trump's Middle East envoy, and Fox News host and Army officer Pete Hegseth will be the new defense secretary. Alongside the pro-Israel hawk Marco Rubio, who was tapped up as Secretary of State, and Representative Elise Stefanik as ambassador to the UN, it is clear where Trump stands when it comes to the Jewish state.
Mike, certainly Huckabee, strong ties to Israel, an ally, supporter of Donald Trump. His daughter Sarah, now the Arkansas governor, was his press secretary. But still a little surprising why Huckabee and not, for example, bringing back David Friedman or another Jewish supporter of Trump like Stephen Witkoff, who becomes the Mideast envoy. Why Huckabee?
Well, it checks off a couple of boxes, essentially, for Trump. Number one, he's getting somebody who's going to be aligned with him on policy. Huckabee's not going to try to usurp Trump in any way, but you're getting somebody who is in line with the policies of the people who put you in office. Remember, Miriam Adelson is the one that gave $100 million to Trump's campaign. Miriam Adelson, I think, has a somewhat of a say in who's going to be representing America to Israel, and I think Huckabee was one of the ones tipped to play that role. I don't think Trump is interested in recycling old members of the administration at this point that he had before. We've seen Mike Pompeo and others that were high up on the list not being welcomed back. It's not necessarily anything against them. I think he just wants to start fresh in a lot of ways, even if these new people will be carrying out much of the same policies as the old administration. But it also checks off another box for Trump, thanking the evangelical Christians who put him in office the first time around and sent him back this time around. They have been the change this time was Latinos and black voters and young voters. But it's been the evangelicals that have been with him almost since day number one, since he selected Mike Pence as his vice presidential candidate. So this was a way of giving back to the evangelical community as well in selecting Mike Huckabee for that role. But again, I don't think there's going to be any disalignment between Trump's foreign policy and Mike Huckabee's vision for how things should be carried out in the Middle East.
Sure, and as he said, it will be Trump that will make the decisions. His job as the ambassador will be to carry them out, or maybe in some way to soften any blows that might come to some. And we'll talk about a little bit of that more in a minute. Mike Wagenheim, they're at the White House on a busy day there in Washington. Mike, thank you for that. And in fact, as we mentioned, Mike Huckabee has spoken out in support of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, in fact, of Israeli annexation of the West Bank. But other former Trump officials from his first term have cautioned Israeli leaders not to expect the president-elect to back that idea unless it comes in the context of a peace agreement that also includes a Palestinian state, something we saw in the first version of the deal of the century. But that has not stopped some government ministers and settlement activists here to claim they see Trump's White House comeback as a launching pad to relaunch extending Israeli sovereignty into Judea and Samaria. Let's take a listen.
I intend, with God's help, to lead a government decision that determines that the Israeli government will act with President Trump's new administration, with the international community for the inclusion of Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, to American and international recognition, and to end the Israeli-Arab conflict in the Middle East.
I think the Biden administration didn't respect the policy of the Israeli government. And I know and I hope that Trump will support the Israeli government. And we, as a state, we have to take a decision. And I'm sure that with Trump, President Trump, it will be much easier because he supports the state of Israel in our eyes. But we will take a decision.
And still with us in studio, reserves IDF Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. Well, as you hear, there's big expectations, certainly in some parts of Israel, and certainly the selection of a Mike Huckabee is going to be warmly greeted in those communities in Judea and Samaria, which he knows well. But the question is the bigger policy.
Exactly.
Well, how much will Trump's natural support for Israel, and he certainly won't criticize settlement growth, but how much his desire for, again, making the deal of the century, making an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, will eventually come to clash with some of the goals that we just heard from Bezalel Smotrich there and other settlement leaders.
I think there's inherent tension here that Trump would have to navigate, because on one hand, clearly, he wants the corridor back. He wants the normalization with Saudi Arabia. He wants the second floor of the Abraham Accord. And this would come, as we know, as the Saudis proclaim themselves, only with some concession towards the Palestinians. On the other hand, those ideas of annexation, of course, stand in contrast to such ideas. So how would he navigate it? And maybe you have said earlier, you were hinting, maybe picking this kind of a team will help him to soften the blow when he will decide. Because I think the Saudi deal this would be the major move that he would like to take. His name is registered on the Abraham Accord. He wants the second floor. He wants to create this corridor, in fact, from India, Saudi to Europe. This would be a dream comes true. But this would not be, there's no way to facilitate it without some concession or some constructive idea. But
let's remember the Palestinians also have to play along to some degree.
Sure.
And that deal that was offered, which did have a Palestinian state, it was in 70% of the West Bank, Israel annexing the other 30%. And that was a non-starter with the Palestinians. I wonder if the Palestinians will change their tune at all now.
Yeah, they have to. I mean, this is a businessman that comes to play world politics, Trump, and people have to think in terms of the same would go with Ukraine. They have to think in terms of the pragmatics of the field, what we have on the ground, and to think whether they want to play for the first time in their history, the Palestinians, to play a pragmatic role. But of course, a full annexation of Judea and Samaria wouldn't work out with such a plan. So there's a tension to expect here, and how to navigate it will be very interesting to see.
Right. And I want to extend also, Ariel, to outside Israel, to Trump's plans in the region, because there are reports this evening, I believe Sky News in Arabic reporting, that Iran has decided it will not launch its retaliatory attack on Israel.
It's postponing it.
Or it's postponing it, waiting to see what how the new incoming Trump administration will react. And of course, Donald Trump in his first term, very hawkish toward Iran, maximalist pressure, pulled out of the deal. But there has been a somewhat change, at least in the tone coming into office, talking about wanting to end wars, not to start them, even talking at one point about making a new deal with Iran. Even if he's brought into his government, I would say Iran hawks like Marco Rubio, for example, or Tim Waltz, the incoming national security advisor.
Yeah, so a short report in Saudi Sky News in Arabic that Iran has decided to postpone its attack against Israel, its vowed attack against Israel. It would be their third direct strike on Israel in history, and also in less than a year. But this comes following, according to the report, the election of Trump for a second term in the White House. I think this is twofold. Also, they want to see how this administration, what tone it sets regarding Iran and broadly regarding the Middle East. But I would also like to connect this to statements yesterday coming out from Iraq's national security advisor, because we know that there were plans for Iran to carry out its attack from Iraqi territory. And so the Iraqi national security advisor saying that in meetings that he had with Iranian officials, including Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, he informed them that Iraq refuses to use its territory on ground or its airspace for attacks in the region. And so with that off the table, it appears that Iran is a little more limited in what it can do to strike Israel, because we know that the results of Israel's most recent retaliation against Iran, the results of that are now that Iran's skies are completely vulnerable. Sure. Israel took out Iran's air defense capabilities. So with Iraq off the table and this second Trump term, I think Iran is trying to take a breather and wait and see how this develops. But I do think, even though they're saying they're postponing, it's right now kind of like what the Saudi foreign minister said about Israeli-Saudi normalization. It's off the table.
Right. The name of the game, gentlemen, in the Middle East now is waiting for Trump.
Waiting for Trump and playing real politics. It will be only rational from their perspective not to attack. And right now, to wait for Trump, I think it would be smart. But of course, there's no prediction in the Middle East also. So let's wait and see.
Right. And of course, a lot of that, let me just say, may depend on what happens in Lebanon. Sure. If Israel proceeds with its campaign against Hezbollah and Iran feels it has to make an action to come to appear at least to come to the defense of Hezbollah, or if some kind of agreement is reached in Lebanon, and that may take away the impetus for Iran to make any.
Also, it also shows how successful our attack was.
Right.
We really put them on the horns of the dilemma. They're really contemplating what to do, and it was a very good attack in terms of the way it was measured and executed.
And more than that, if a deal in Lebanon is reached before there is a deal in Gaza, ceasefire in Gaza, that would mean Israel succeeded in decoupling the two fronts, something that Hezbollah has repeatedly vowed, that the two fronts are connected, and it will be interesting to see how that effect perhaps spills over to other proxies, because they're engaged also in what they call a supportive front to Gaza. And so if Lebanon, or if Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful proxy, backtracks from that vow, it could also affect other of Iran's other proxies, mainly in Yemen and Iraq, but that's not for sure, obviously.
All right, gentlemen, as we'll see, this is going to be, as the president-elect likes to say, stay tuned. Ariel Osseron, thank you for joining us. Stay with us, Doron Avital. We're going to turn now briefly to Amsterdam, where Dutch authorities are continuing to enforce a citywide ban on public protests following last week's wave of attacks on Jews and Israelis following the Maccabi Tel Aviv Ajax Amsterdam soccer match. Now, in the aftermath of that and other such incidents, some Muslim residents of the Netherlands capital are speaking out against the Arab and Muslim extremists who have been taking part in the violent disturbances. Let's take a listen.
We don't like to see this sort of events. Today, in any case, we can say that it's quite calm here. It is a calm neighborhood, as you can see. We try in any case to advocate for peace, and really, actions like that really displease us. But then, there is always excessive behavior. But that's how it is, especially with the news currently, which has been difficult. We hope that peace will come one day. We are all the same. Whether we are white, black, Arab, Muslim, Jewish, whatever. We are the same. We have the same blood flowing through our veins. And so I think we have to trust each other and to relax. Life is cool. Don't create drama.
It's very difficult. It's not okay. It's not okay to do what is now going on. It's not okay. You need to think with a peace heart.
All right, Amsterdam, good to hear some of those voices being expressed. Moving on. Israel's wars against Hamas and Hezbollah have badly impacted on several sectors of Israel's economy, including, maybe especially, the construction industry. That's a big problem for the entire country, since nearly a quarter of the national budget actually derives from real estate and property taxes. Now, a major factor in the downturn in building is lack of workers. The construction industry was heavily dependent on Palestinian labor from the West Bank and Gaza, all of whom have been barred from entering Israel since the October 7th attack. And much of the foreign labor evaporated in Israel when China pulled most of its workers out of the country over the past year. Now, encouraging and training more Israelis to do construction work is one answer, but one that will take a lot more time and a lot more effort. Another solution the government is pursuing is bringing in laborers from a country that has stood by Israel during this difficult period, the nation of India. And joining us from India, from New Delhi, is Samir Khosla, chairman of Dynamic Staffing Services. Maybe explain briefly what it is about bringing Indian labor, I guess, outside the country to other countries.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. Our organization is a 50-year-old company. We've sent 500,000 people out of India. Israel is the newest country where we're sending workers. And Israel offers the Indian workers an immense economic opportunity. And I might say it's the best earning opportunity they have outside India in any international market. This makes it exciting for the Indian workers to come to Israel. And we're happy to participate in building the relationship between India and Israel.
Right. Anyone who travels in the Gulf, for example, sees such the presence of Indian workers. I mean, it makes me wonder why there weren't Indian workers here before. Of course, it could be bureaucracy, red tape has a lot to do with that.
It's a very interesting point you make, Aleph, because the 60% of the workforce in the Gulf, about 9 million workers in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, are of Indian origin. India is the world's largest provider of foreign workers globally. And, better late than never. We're here in Israel now.
Right. Now, foreign workers in Israel can be a touchy subject, unlike some of those Gulf countries where you see millions of people here. There are some cultural issues involved, security issues. How is it going? What are the challenges that you face, or a company like yours, bringing Indian workers here? And what more could be done, for example, by the government to facilitate that process?
I arrived here for the first time on 15th November 2023. And I received the first Indian worker on February 13th, 2023. Since that time, our company has delivered about 3,500 workers into this market, and we have an additional 1,000 people in the pipeline right now. It's a first for our country, and it's a first for Israel. So we're building the plane as we're flying it, and your country has a very stringent, diligent, and demanding documentation process when it comes to the visas of the workers. So this is a big challenge for us to prepare the visa applications, for your government to process the visa applications. This is a very, very heavy task for all of us. And this has been one of the major factors that delays or slows down the progress of bringing workers into this country. So I think your government is doing a lot. I think we've received a lot of support in accelerating this process. I think the future is bright. And these challenges are bureaucratic. I think they will be resolved in the coming days.
Right. Doron, I want to put this in the bigger picture because Israel has been building. You've been involved in security issues, I'm sure, and so we've seen security cooperation with India, growing economic cooperation, and in general, it's just, I would say, almost like a strategic shifting of Israel from, for example, looking to build ties with China, now refocusing on India, and certainly this could be a big part of that.
No question about that. I think India comes out as the anchor, if you want, to the whole plan of this corridor that comes from India. Remember the Modi agreement with the Europeans a few weeks before the 7th of October. And this corridor that goes for Saudi Arabia, goes for the normalization, goes here, and goes to Europe. This is, I think, the only real prospect that you can see for the region. So India is the anchor, and I think in terms of tech, me and my friends in this capacity, we are trying to facilitate the connection in some level. In fact, a few weeks after the 7th of October, I was in Bangalore with the Synergia Foundation, and I was excited to see the eagerness on both sides to create this kind of corridor from India to here. India is the anchor. One statement, I met the head of the Indian Navy. He said a beautiful line that Napoleon said, whoever commands the Indian Ocean commands the world. So everything starts from the Indian Ocean through the Saudis. I think Trump thinks this way. Let's hope this is a whole new future.
Right, and let's put it in the context that India has been, thanks to, I would say, starting from the top, from Narendra Modi down, has been so supportive of Israel since October 7th. And it doesn't present the sort of political problems that, say, for example, Israel discovered it had with China and bringing in Chinese labor.
That's right, and I think it starts from the top down. There's a lot of goodwill for Israel in India. And as a person, I arrived here for the first time just a year ago. There's a lot of cultural similarities. We have 3,500 workers here. They're happy. They're reporting high levels of satisfaction. And the pillars upon which we stand, our Ministry of External Affairs, our embassy, they're all positive about this relationship. And we look forward. I think the future is bright.
What would be a target, let's say a year from now? You say 3,500 a year. Because, to give some numbers, Palestinian laborers, some 100,000 were unable now to come in the country. And, of course, thousands of more Chinese workers that were pulled. What would be a target that you would be satisfied to see coming to Israel within a year?
Well, it's a two-part answer to that, Khalif. There's a target for your country, and there's a target. We're a private organization for us. So, and also I'd like to add that as a country receiving foreign workers, you need a diversified portfolio of foreign workers. Sure. As the Arab countries in the Gulf do, they split. So we have 60% Indian. So my personal target is about 10,000 workers from our organization to Israel. Our company does about 16,000 workers a year. We have the capacity and the capability to deliver it.
All right. Again, this is something that the construction industry badly needs and may expand to other areas of the economy as well. And, of course, as you said, Doron Avital, high-tech cooperation. Samir Kosor, thank you for joining us from India on I-24 News. Doron Avital, thank you for being with us on this broadcast as well. That ends this edition of The Rundown. We thank you for joining us on this evening. Stay tuned with I-24 News and all our social media platforms. Thank you for joining us.